Earlier this week, I made a decision. I'm going to back away from Facebook. I'll still be posting indicators that my Soul Care with Stevie Boy installments are available, but I don't plan on burning very much time off on Facebook for a while at least, and who knows, we'll see. I don't intend to make anybody's life easier or harder by this. I'm just saying for now, no moss. And that is okay because I got other stuff in my life. And one of the big things in my life these days is Soul Care with Stevie Boy. We're in 1 Peter chapter 3, and we've spent a long time dealing with what he wrote about women and to women for their benefit. And then in verse 7, he, in fewer words, but with precision, talks to husbands. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as a weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. There is a lot in that one verse. Too much for me to basically cover in one installment, so just know that it's going to take us a little while to work our way through this one verse. Husbands, in the same way. Well, that's like therefore. We have to look. So what way are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the basic concept, the most basic concept that he writes about when he writes to wives is the idea of the example of their conduct. The big thing was that unbelieving husbands could be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. And this sets itself up in humility and authenticity. This is the two big things that Peter points at for wives are purity and reverence. These are the things that ought to mark every believer's life. And so, husbands in the same way, with humility, with authenticity, with purity, with reverence. In the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives. That's interesting. Okay, I admit it. Pretty much everything here is interesting to me. But there's an important aspect of this idea of be considerate as you live with your wives. A lot of people think about consideration as basic politeness. No, you go first, or here, I'll hold the door for you, or a man for his date, let me open the door for you. I mean, that's just basic consideration. But in this context, in the same way, be considerate. That has a much deeper, I think a more significant meaning than we might initially assign to it. Husbands, in the same ways, be considerate as you live with your wives. What does it mean to consider something? Well, for a lot of people, to consider something is, well, think about it. Like, have you ever had to go buy a vehicle and your salesman makes you an offer and, well, let me consider that. Basically, what that means is, don't press me right now because I'll have to process this. Well, that's legitimate. I mean, if you're not doing that, you need to not buy cars that way. And I'm not casting a disparaging remark toward car salesmen. I'm just saying there are things we've got to consider. We've got to ponder. And ponder is perhaps a better word for consideration. To be considerate as we live with our wives means we need to be thoughtful, to ponder. This kind of thought is deep thought. It's not the surface thought of, you read the newspaper, you get the news, you hear what's on the radio, and you think about it, and then you move on. No, this is the kind of thing that we dwell on because it has significant, important implications. This is not about where should we go to eat for dinner, or what time you want me to show up for work, or see, these are basically things that you need to think about, but they don't require the same consideration as who. We're getting ready. We're moving into the season where one of the things you've got to consider is, who should I vote for? You toss a coin, heads or tails, and that makes your choice for you. Some people do that. That's not my idea of wise stewardship of your responsibility and opportunity. But to consider means I think deeply about my wife. I think deeply about her needs, what she perceives of her needs and what I believe her needs to be. And more important than either of those two things is this. Is there anything in what God has given us in His Word that leads me to a deeper understanding of what both of our true needs are? One of the things that a husband must constantly be considering in terms of his relationship with his wife is how do I help us move closer together in deeper, more committed intimacy? How do I give more of my life, opening more of my life up for my wife? How do I live more completely honestly with her? These, for a lot of guys, that's just how they're wired. They're going to do that. But there are a lot of men, well, women too, but I have worked with a lot of men in my counseling work who they struggle with that. Part of it is to be that vulnerable, and honestly, consideration of this kind requires vulnerability. But to be that vulnerable puts most men off because it puts them in a position of weakness. And of the many things that most of us men don't really like, being weak or perceived as being weak, it's got to top the list of things we don't like. Be considerate as you live with your wives. Now, you set that in the framework of what he said, in the same way. Remember what I talked about? In humility, in authenticity, in purity, in reverence for God. That's a pretty compelling framework in which to think deeply. Do you exclude secular psychology? I don't think you have to. I think there's a bit of secular psychology, to be honest. It's just silliness. I mean, anybody who does think deeply, who does this consideration, should be able to ferret through to what is there and what is not there, right? Do you throw everything out, the baby with the bathwater? No. Some of what the study of human behavior has given us is very, very powerful. And one of the ways I judge the validity of psychology is, does it help me understand and apply God's truth? Good psychology and good psychological theory does that. And honestly, for the most part, lots and lots and lots of the theoretical side of psychology should stay theoretical. But there are some parts of this theoretical piece that they have been applied into the practical and the practice, the clinical aspect of psychology, and are proven either effective or ineffective. Then you have to look at, sorry, I'm going so deep in the weeds, but I'm in that mood. Then you have to think about, okay, what appears to be affirming and confirming about this psychological theory in terms of clinical practice. Does it fit with, does it jive with what I understand about God's truth? That's the stuff that I try to hold on to. So don't throw it all out, but be discreet, be thoughtful, consider. Men, live with your wives. Be considerate as you live with your wives. Our wives are generally not wired the way we are. And this would be a great spot for me for a few minutes to just ask you to think with me, to consider with me some of the ways that women and men differ in the way they perceive, understand, and apply data that comes into their five senses. One of my favorite resources for this is a guy named Mark Gungor, Gungor. If you go to your web browser and you type in The Tale of Two Brains, it will give you a variety of options for a presentation that Mark Gungor does in his marriage seminar, which is entitled Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage, where he gives a very winsome and compelling presentation about the major differences between men and women. I highly recommend, whether you've been married 20 minutes or 60 years, most everybody is going to find some stuff in that presentation that will be oh so helpful. Some of the big broad differences have to do with the fact that men do not use as many words as women do generally. Many years ago now, James Dobson wrote the book, What Wives Wish Their Husbands Knew About Women. Still a wonderful book, even though it's, almost 40 years old by now, maybe more than 40 years old. But the truth that he mined and then set out in that book, it is so worth taking a look at. One of the big things he talked about is that most women will use twice as many words in the course of a day as a husband will. Now, if you've wives, let me just ask you to think about this. Your husband goes to dinner with friends, and he comes home, and you say, "How was dinner?" What's your husband usually say? "Yeah, it was good, really good." And that's not the information you were after. You wanted to know who was there, what was the atmosphere, what did you eat, what was the conversation that went on between. And most men, that's not what it was good. I mean, it was really good. I'm glad I went. Men, on the other hand, your wife goes out with her friends, has a meal, she comes home, and you kind of want to know, was it good? Did you have a good time? And her answer will probably be, "Oh yeah." And then she'll describe the place they went, probably give you several of the options on the menu. She'll talk about what she had. She'll talk about what some of her friends had. In other words, she expands, men contract. That's an important thing to realize. And while I've got another 30 seconds, I just want to finish this little installment by saying a lot of times a guy comes home from work and he has spent 93% of his words already. Your wife comes home from work and she still has about half of hers left. Or if she's been home with children all day, she has about 94% of her words left. And guys, You have to you have to realize this. You have to consider the fact that she needs to express herself. You're done talking, and you're not real jazzed about listening, by the way, either. Well, if you're going to be considerate as you live with your wife, you better factor in her need to express against the fact that you've already expressed pretty much everything you're going to express in this 24 hours, and you've already heard way more than you really wanted to hear through the day. When you live with your wife in a considerate way, you can change the dynamics of your marriage. Next time, we're going to talk about more of those dynamics. And you, of course, you know me, it's going to take a while for us to get where we're going to go. So I'm going to close and hope I get to talk to you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.